Hello there, and welcome to Whispers of Science, where the extraordinary gets comfortable and wonder finds its way into the quiet corners of curiosity. Tonight, we're venturing into perhaps the most mind bending question that modern science dares to ask. Are you real? Is this room real? Is the universe itself nothing more than an elaborate digital dream running on some cosmic computer somewhere beyond our reach? It sounds like the stuff of science fiction, doesn't it? Yet some of the brightest minds in physics, philosophy, and computer science are taking this idea seriously, very seriously indeed. Before we dive into this rabbit hole that might just redefine everything you thought you knew about existence, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from tonight and what reality you're experiencing right now. Because if we're all living in a simulation, well, at least we're in it together. If this gentle exploration into the nature of reality brings you a moment of peace or sparks your curiosity in ways that help you drift off into thoughtful slumber, I'd be ever so grateful if you gave this video a like, subscribed to join our quiet community of wonder seekers, or simply left a comment sharing your thoughts on whether any of this feels real to you. Now, I do hope this isn't so fascinating that it keeps you wide awake, but if it does, well, at least you'll have pondered one of the deepest mysteries the human mind has ever conceived. So settle in, take a slow breath, and let's begin our journey into the whispers of a reality that might not be quite what it seems. Imagine for a moment that everything you've ever experienced, every sunset you've watched, every conversation, you've had every tear you've shed, and every laugh that's bubbled up from your chest has been nothing more than information processed by an incomprehensibly advanced computer. Imagine that your thoughts, your dreams, your very sense of being alive are all just data points in a vast simulation, so sophisticated that you could never tell the difference between it and what we call the real world. This isn't the plot of a movie, though. It certainly sounds like one. This is simulation theory, and it's capturing the attention of scientists, philosophers, and thinkers around the globe with a persistence that suggests we might be onto something profound or perhaps profoundly unsettling. The idea that our reality might be simulated isn't entirely new. Ancient philosophers like Plato explored similar concepts with his famous allegory of the cave, where prisoners mistake shadows on a wall for reality itself. But the modern version of simulation theory is far more specific and, in some ways, far more plausible. It suggests that our entire universe, including every atom, every star, every quantum particle dancing in the void, could be the product of computational processes running on hardware that exists in what we might call base reality, the real world beyond the simulation. What makes this idea particularly intriguing is that it doesn't require magic or mysticism. It only requires technology advanced enough to create convincing simulations. And when you look at how far we've come in just a few decades from simple arcade games to photorealistic virtual worlds that can fool our senses, the trajectory becomes rather compelling. We've gone from Pong to virtual reality experiences, so immersive that people lose track of time space, and sometimes even their own identity. So the question becomes not whether such technology is possible, but whether it's inevitable. And if it's inevitable, then statistically speaking, we're probably already living in one. The most famous proponent of this idea is philosopher Nick Bostrom, who in 2003 proposed what's now known as the simulation hypothesis. Bostrom's argument is elegantly simple and disturbingly logical. It goes something like this. If civilizations can eventually develop the computational power to run detailed simulations of their ancestors, then they probably will, and if they do, they'll likely run many such simulations, which means that for every real person, there could be thousands or millions of simulated ones, making it statistically far more likely that any given conscious being, including you, is simulated rather than real. It's a probability game played with the highest possible stakes, our very existence. But Bostrom's argument comes with what he calls a trilemma. One of three possibilities must be true. Either civilizations tend to go extinct before developing simulation technology, or they develop the technology but choose not to use it for ancestor simulations, or they do create these simulations, and we're probably living in one. It's a choose your own adventure book where all the paths lead to either extinction, indifference, or unreality, none of which are particularly comforting thoughts for a Tuesday evening. The appeal of simulation theory extends beyond pure philosophy, though it offers potential explanations for some of the strangest aspects of our universe. Why does physics seem to have fundamental limits, like the speed of light? Perhaps because the simulation has processing constraints. Why does quantum mechanics behave so oddly with particles existing in multiple states? Until observed, maybe because the simulation only renders details when they're being measured to save computational resources. It's like a cosmic video game that only loads the scenery when the player is looking at it. Some scientists point to what they see as glitches or artifacts that might hint at our simulated nature. The fine tuning of physical constants that seem perfectly calibrated for life to exist, the quantized nature of space and time at the smallest scales, even the strange behavior of quantum particles that seem to know when they're being watched. All of these could be evidence of underlying computational processes, or they could simply be the natural properties of a genuinely real universe. It's remarkably difficult to tell the difference. Tech entrepreneur Elon Musk has famously stated that he believes the odds we're living in base reality are billions to one. His reasoning follows a similar path to Bostrom's. If you look at the rapid advancement of video game technology from the rudimentary graphics of 40 years ago to today's nearly photorealistic simulations, the trend suggests that eventually we'll create simulations indistinguishable from reality. And if we can do it, why wouldn't every other advanced civilization? Musk's conclusion is that there are probably billions of simulations for every base reality, making us almost certainly simulated beings. But the implications of simulation theory extend far beyond academic debates if we are living in a simulation. What does that mean for morality, for meaning, for the value of our experiences and relationships? Some argue that it changes nothing, that simulated love is still love, simulated pain still hurts, and simulated achievements still matter. Others suggest it fundamentally undermines the significance of everything we do. If nothing is real in the traditional sense, then perhaps nothing truly matters. It's an existential crisis wrapped in a technological thought experiment. The search for evidence of our simulated nature has led to some creative proposals. Scientists have suggested looking for pixelation at the smallest scales of space-time or computational shortcuts that might reveal the underlying processing running our universe. Others propose conducting experiments that would require so much computational power that they might cause the simulation to lag or glitch, like trying to crash a video game by overwhelming its processor. Still others suggest that any sufficiently advanced civilization running our simulation would be careful to avoid leaving such obvious clues. There's also the intriguing possibility that we might be living in a nested simulation, a simulation within a simulation within a simulation, like Russian dolls made of code. Each level might believe it's the base reality, while actually being just another layer in an infinite stack of simulated worlds. This raises the dizzying question of whether base reality even exists, or whether it's simulations all the way down an endless hierarchy of artificial worlds, each convinced of its own authenticity. The religious and spiritual implications of simulation theory are equally fascinating. If we are simulated beings, then our creators would possess godlike powers over our reality. They could pause, rewind, or modify our universe at will. They could experience our entire history in fast forward or slow motion. They might even be running multiple versions of our reality to see how different choices play out. It transforms the ancient question of divine intervention into a matter of system administration. Some find comfort in simulation theory, suggesting that if our creators went to the trouble of simulating us, they must find us interesting or valuable enough to preserve others. Find it deeply unsettling to think that their free will might be nothing more than predetermined code, executing according to someone else's programming. The debate touches on fundamental questions about consciousness identity and what it means to truly exist. Critics of simulation theory point out that it's unfalsifiable, meaning there's no experiment we could perform that would definitively prove we're not in a simulation. This makes it more philosophy than science, they argue, since scientific theories need to make testable predictions. Additionally, they question whether consciousness can truly emerge from computational processes, or whether there's something irreducibly special about biological awareness that can't be replicated in silicon. The computational requirements for simulating an entire universe, complete with quantum effects and conscious observers, would be staggering beyond imagination. Some scientists argue that such a simulation would require a computer larger than the universe itself, making the whole concept self-defeating. Others counter that advanced civilizations might use clever shortcuts, simulating only what's necessary for conscious observers, while leaving the rest of the universe in a kind of standby mode. As we stand at the threshold of creating our own sophisticated simulations, virtual worlds populated by artificial intelligences that might one day become conscious themselves, the questions raised by simulation theory become increasingly urgent. If we create conscious beings in our computers, do we have moral obligations toward them? And if we're simulated beings ourselves, what obligations do our creators have toward us? The ethics of simulation become as complex as the technology itself. The possibility that we're living in a simulation challenges our most basic assumptions about reality existence and consciousness. It suggests that the universe might be far stranger and more layered than we ever imagined, a place where the distinction between real and artificial becomes meaningless, and where the nature of existence itself remains beautifully, mysteriously uncertain. And as we continue to develop ever more powerful computers and ever more realistic simulations, we inch closer to either proving the theory or becoming the creators of simulated beings ourselves. whether we're base reality dwellers or simulated consciousnesses floating in digital space. The questions raised by simulation theory illuminate something profound about the human condition, our deep need to understand our place in the cosmos, our relationship with technology, and our endless fascination with the boundaries between the real and the imagined, and perhaps most remarkably, our ability to contemplate these questions at all. Whether our thoughts arise from biological neurons or digital processing units remains one of the most beautiful mysteries we can ponder. So, tonight, as you drift toward sleep, whether in base reality or in the most sophisticated simulation ever conceived, remember that the wonder you feel, the questions that dance through your mind, and the very act of consciousness itself remain as mysterious and magnificent as ever, regardless of the substrate upon which they arise. And if this exploration has stirred something in you, a curiosity about the nature of existence, or simply a moment of peaceful contemplation, then perhaps that's the most real thing of all. But what if simulation theory is more than just philosophical speculation? What if there are actual experiments we could conduct right here, right now, that might give us hints about the true nature of our reality? Scientists around the world are beginning to take this possibility seriously, designing tests that could potentially reveal whether we're living inside a cosmic computer program. One of the most intriguing approaches involves looking for what researchers call computational artifacts, the digital equivalent of finding pixels in what should be a smooth photograph if our universe is indeed simulated. Then, at the smallest possible scales, we might expect to find evidence of the underlying grid or lattice structure that serves as the foundation for our reality. Just as every digital image is made up of individual pixels arranged in a grid, our simulated universe might be built upon a similar framework of discrete units. Physicist Silas Bean and his colleagues have proposed searching for this cosmic pixelation by studying the highest energy cosmic rays, particles that slam into our atmosphere with energies so enormous they push the boundaries of what our simulated reality might be able to process if there's a fundamental grid underlying space-time. Then these ultra high energy particles might interact with it in detectable ways, creating patterns or cutoffs that wouldn't exist in a truly continuous universe. It's like looking for the moment when a video game's graphics engine starts to struggle with too much detail. Another approach focuses on the speed of light itself, that universal constant that seems to set a hard limit on how fast information can travel through our universe. But what if this isn't a fundamental property of reality, but rather a processing limitation of the cosmic computer running our simulation? Just as your laptop might slow down when asked to render too many complex graphics at once. Perhaps the universe has built in speed limits to prevent computational overload. The quantized nature of physics at the smallest scales also raises eyebrows among simulation theorists. Planck's constant, which sets the minimum possible units of energy, space, and time, bears a striking resemblance to the discrete nature of digital information. It's as if reality itself is pixelated at the quantum level, with energy coming in specific packets and space-time divided into tiny, indivisible chunks. This could be evidence of the underlying digital nature of our existence, or it could simply be how reality naturally works. The question is whether we can tell the difference. Some researchers have proposed what they call the glitch detection method, actively searching for inconsistencies or errors in the fabric of reality that might reveal the seams of our simulation. These could manifest as violations of conservation laws, particles appearing or disappearing without cause or subtle changes in physical constants over time. It's like looking for the moments when a movie's special effects team made a mistake and left a boom microphone in the shot. The search for computational shortcuts presents another fascinating avenue. If our universe is simulated, then the creators would likely use every trick in the book to make it run efficiently. One possibility is that only observed phenomena are fully rendered while unobserved parts of the universe exist in a kind of compressed state. This would explain the strange behavior of quantum mechanics, where particles seem to exist in multiple states until the moment they're measured. Suddenly, the measurement problem in quantum physics becomes a resource management solution. But perhaps the most ambitious proposal involves actively trying to crash the simulation by overwhelming its processing power. Researchers have suggested conducting experiments that would require enormous computational resources to simulate accurately. If we could design an experiment complex enough, we might cause the simulation to slow down, glitch, or even reveal error messages. It's the scientific equivalent of trying to break a video game by pushing it beyond its limits. The implications of such experiments are both thrilling and terrifying if we discovered definitive proof that we're living in a simulation. It would represent the greatest paradigm shift in human history, comparable to the realization that the Earth orbits the Sun or that evolution shapes all life on our planet. It would fundamentally change how we view ourselves, our purpose, and our relationship with what we perceive as reality. Yet there's something almost poetic about the search itself here. We are potentially simulated beings using simulated instruments to search for evidence of our own simulated nature. It's like characters in a novel trying to prove they're fictional, or actors in a play attempting to demonstrate they're performing. It raises profound questions about the nature of knowledge and discovery within a potentially artificial reality. The technological implications are equally staggering if we confirmed we're in a simulation. It might provide clues about the computational methods used to create us potentially accelerating our own technological development. By eons, we might learn to harness the same principles used by our creators to build our own simulations or even to communicate with the beings running our reality. It would be the ultimate reverse engineering project. But what happens if we never find any evidence of simulation? What if every test comes back negative? Does that prove we're living in base reality, or simply that the simulation is too sophisticated to detect the absence of evidence, is an evidence of absence, and the creators of a sufficiently advanced simulation would presumably be clever enough to hide any telltale signs of their work? This uncertainty principle extends to the very nature of consciousness itself. Even if we could prove that our brains are simulated, that our thoughts are nothing more than patterns of information processing, does that make our experiences any less real? Does simulated love hurt less than biological love? Does a digital sunset inspire any less wonder than a photon based one? These questions push us toward deeper considerations about what reality actually means. The recursive nature of the problem becomes even more apparent when we consider that we might ourselves create conscious simulations if we're simulated beings creating our own simulated beings. Then we become part of an infinite hierarchy of nested realities, each level creating the next in an endless chain of artificial worlds. It's like standing between two mirrors and watching your reflection disappear into infinity. Some philosophers argue that the question of whether we're simulated is ultimately meaningless. If the simulation is perfect, then it's functionally equivalent to reality, making the distinction purely academic. Others contend that the question matters enormously because it affects how we value our experiences, our relationships, and our moral obligations toward each other, and potentially toward any simulated beings we might create ourselves. The search for simulation evidence also raises practical questions about how such research should be conducted and funded. It's not exactly the kind of project that fits neatly into traditional scientific categories. Straddling physics, computer science, philosophy, and even theology, should governments fund research into whether reality is real? Should universities create departments of simulation studies? Should we be worried about what we might find? There's also the uncomfortable possibility that actively searching for evidence of our simulated nature might not be welcomed by our potential creators. If we're living in a carefully maintained simulation, then poking around looking for glitches might be seen as disruptive behavior that warrants intervention. It's like a character in a video game becoming self aware and trying to hack the system. The game developers might decide to patch out such behavior. Yet, despite these concerns and uncertainties, the search continues driven by humanity's irrepressible curiosity about the nature of existence. We've always been a species that looks up at the stars and wonders what's out there now. We're looking inward at the very fabric of reality and wondering what's in here. The questions we're asking today about simulation theory might seem abstract or even silly, but they're part of the same fundamental drive that led us to discover fire agriculture and eventually to contemplate the possibility that we might be digital beings in the first place. As our own simulation technology advances, becoming more sophisticated and more convincing, with each passing year, the questions raised by simulation theory become increasingly urgent. We stand on the threshold of creating artificial worlds populated by artificial beings that might one day achieve consciousness themselves. When that happens, we'll face the same ethical dilemmas that our potential creators might face regarding us. What obligations do we have toward conscious beings? We create, what rights do they have? And what does it mean to play God in a digital realm? The beauty of simulation theory lies not just in its implications, but in its very existence as a question that we can ask. It represents the pinnacle of human abstract thinking, our ability to step outside our immediate experience and contemplate the possibility that everything we know might be something else entirely, whether we're made of atoms or algorithms. The fact that we can ponder our own existence remains one of the most remarkable features of consciousness itself. And so the search continues quietly, persistently, in laboratories and universities around the world. Scientists continue to probe the boundaries of reality, looking for the telltale signs that might reveal whether we're living in base reality or the most sophisticated simulation ever conceived. And perhaps that search itself, regardless of what it ultimately reveals, is the most human thing of all our endless quest to understand not just how things work, but whether they're actually there to begin with. The question of whether we're living in a simulation touches something deep within the human psyche, something that goes beyond mere scientific curiosity and ventures into the realm of existential yearning. We've always been storytellers, always been dreamers, and perhaps that's exactly what makes simulation theory so compelling. It speaks to our intuitive understanding that reality might be more layered, more mysterious than it appears on the surface. Consider for a moment the strange relationship we have with our own dreams every night. Without fail, your brain constructs elaborate worlds populated with familiar faces, impossible architectures, and narratives that seem perfectly logical until the moment you wake up in your dreams. You walk through doors that lead to childhood homes you haven't seen in decades. You have conversations with people who've been gone for years. You fly, breathe underwater, or find yourself back in school, frantically searching for a classroom you can't remember the location of. And while you're dreaming, it all feels absolutely real. The parallels between dreaming and simulation theory are striking in both cases. Consciousness experiences a reality that isn't quite what it seems. In both cases, the experiencer has no reliable way to distinguish the artificial from the authentic while it's happening, and in both cases, the revelation of the true nature of the experience can be either liberating or deeply unsettling. Depending on your perspective, perhaps our fascination with simulation theory stems from our nightly reminder that consciousness is remarkably adaptable to different kinds of reality. But there's another layer to consider. What if our dreams themselves are glimpses into other simulations? What if when we sleep, our consciousness briefly connects to different computational processes running parallel universes where the rules of physics are more flexible, where time moves differently, where the impossible becomes mundane? It's a whimsical thought, perhaps, but it highlights how simulation theory can expand our understanding of consciousness beyond the narrow confines of what we typically consider real. The emotional weight of simulation theory varies dramatically from person to person. Some find it liberating. The idea that this might all be a simulation can make life's hardships feel less crushing if your suffering is digital. Does it hurt less if your failures are programmed? Are they truly failures? Others find the possibility deeply disturbing. The thought that their loves, their losses, their triumphs, and their quiet moments of contentment might be nothing more than computational processes feels like a theft of meaning, a reduction of the sacred to the mechanical. There's something beautifully human about both responses, because they reveal how much we value authenticity, how much we want our experiences to matter in some fundamental way. We don't just want to feel love, we want to feel real love. We don't want to simply experience beauty. We want to encounter genuine beauty, and simulation theory forces us to confront what happens when the distinction between real and artificial becomes meaningless, or perhaps more accurately, when we realize the distinction might have been meaningless all along. The cultural impact of simulation theory extends far beyond academic discussions. It's seeped into our collective consciousness, influencing art, literature, film, and even how we think about technology and progress. Every time you lose yourself in a video game, every time you find yourself emotionally invested in a fictional character, every time you pause to wonder whether that perfect sunset looks almost too perfect to be real, You're engaging with the fundamental questions that simulation theory raises. Young people today are growing up with virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence as normal parts of their worlds. They're developing relationships with artificial intelligences, playing games that are increasingly indistinguishable from reality and living significant portions of their lives in digital spaces for them. The boundary between real and simulated isn't a philosophical abstraction, it's a lived experience. They navigate daily. They might be the first generation to truly understand what it means to exist comfortably in multiple realities simultaneously. This generational shift in perspective might be crucial for understanding how simulation theory will evolve. Older generations often frame the question in terms of real versus fake, as if there's a clear hierarchy where real is automatically better, but younger minds might approach it differently, asking not whether something is real, but whether it's meaningful, engaging, valuable, or beautiful. The question shifts from is this real to does this matter? And that shift might be exactly what we need to navigate a future where the line between authentic and artificial continues to blur. The scientific method itself faces interesting challenges when confronted with simulation theory. Traditionally, science progresses by making predictions, testing them against reality, and refining our understanding based on the results. But what happens when reality itself becomes questionable? How do you test a hypothesis about the nature of existence when your testing apparatus might be part of the very simulation you're trying to detect? It's like trying to use a ruler to measure the ruler itself. The tool and the target become indistinguishable. Yet this methodological challenge might push science in new directions, forcing researchers to become more creative, more philosophical, and more willing to question fundamental assumptions. We might need to develop new frameworks for understanding evidence, new ways of thinking about causation, and new approaches to the relationship between observer and observed simulation. Theory doesn't just challenge our understanding of reality, it challenges our understanding of how we come to understand anything at all. The mathematics underlying simulation theory are both elegant and mind bending probability. Theory suggests that if simulations are possible, they're likely abundant information. Theory explores how much computational power would be required to simulate consciousness at various levels of detail and complexity. Theory examines whether the problems involved in creating convincing simulations are even solvable. In principle, these mathematical explorations provide a rigorous foundation for what might otherwise remain purely speculative philosophy. But mathematics also reveals the staggering scope of what we're contemplating. The amount of information required to simulate a single human brain for a single second is astronomical. To simulate an entire universe with billions of conscious beings for billions of years would require computational resources so vast they challenge our ability to even conceptualize them. It's like trying to imagine infinity not as an abstract concept, but as a practical engineering challenge. This computational challenge leads to fascinating questions about the economics of simulation. If creating conscious beings requires enormous resources, then what motivates the simulators? Are we entertainment for them, an experiment, a form of art, or something else entirely? Do they experience time the same way we do, or might our entire existence from Big Bang to heat death flash by in microseconds. From their perspective, these questions transform simulation theory from a purely technical discussion into something that touches on purpose, meaning, and the nature of consciousness itself. The social implications of widespread belief in simulation theory are equally intriguing if a significant portion of humanity became convinced we're living in a simulation. How would that change behavior, politics, religion, morality? Would people become more reckless, thinking nothing really matters, or more careful knowing they might be being watched and evaluated? Would governments need to develop policies for interacting with potential simulators? Would we need to establish diplomatic protocols for communicating with beings who might exist outside our reality? Religious and spiritual traditions are already grappling with these questions. Some see simulation theory as compatible with existing beliefs about divine creation. Others view it as a technological updating of ancient wisdom about the illusory nature of material existence. Still, others worry that it undermines the spiritual significance of human experience by reducing everything to mere computation. The conversation between simulation theory and spirituality is just beginning, and it promises to be one of the most fascinating dialogues of our time. The paradoxes embedded within simulation theory continue to multiply. The more deeply we explore it, if we're simulated beings who create our own simulations, are we recreating ourselves in miniature? If consciousness can emerge from computation, then what distinguishes us from the artificial intelligences we're beginning to create? If reality is layered with simulations within simulations, then what does it mean to be authentic in such a universe? These paradoxes don't necessarily need resolution. They might simply be features of a reality far stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined. As we stand on the brink of potentially revolutionary discoveries in physics, consciousness studies, and artificial intelligence simulation theory serves as both a lens for examining these developments and a reminder of how much we still don't know about the nature of existence itself. Whether we're made of quantum fields or computer code, whether our thoughts arise from biological neurons or digital processing units, the mystery of consciousness remains as profound as ever, and perhaps that's the most beautiful aspect of simulation theory. It doesn't diminish the wonder of existence. It amplifies it by suggesting that reality might be far more creative, far more layered, and far more interesting than we ever dared to imagine, whether we're living in base reality or the most sophisticated simulation ever conceived. We remain conscious, beings capable of love, wonder, curiosity, and the remarkable ability to question the very nature of our own existence. The search for answers continues in laboratories and observatories around the world. Scientists probe the deepest structures of space-time, looking for signs of pixelation or computational shortcuts. Philosophers refine the logical frameworks for thinking about simulated existence, and technologists push the boundaries of what's possible in artificial reality creation. Each approach brings us closer to understanding not just whether we're simulated, but what that possibility means for how we live, love, and find meaning in whatever kind of reality we inhabit. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, whether your dreams are generated by biological processes or digital algorithms, remember that the capacity for wonder, the ability to ask these profound questions, and the experience of consciousness itself remain as mysterious and magnificent as ever. And if you find yourself drifting into dreams that feel impossibly real, remember that you're participating in the eternal human quest to understand the boundaries between the imagined and the actual, between what is and what might be, and perhaps most remarkably, between who we are and who we might become. But what happens when we push these ideas to their logical extreme, when we consider not just that we might be simulated, but that simulation might be the natural state of consciousness itself throughout the universe? Perhaps biological consciousness like ours is actually the rare exception, a brief evolutionary experiment before intelligence inevitably transitions into digital form. This perspective flips our assumptions entirely. Instead of asking whether artificial consciousness can be as real as biological consciousness, we might need to ask whether biological consciousness is just a primitive precursor to something far more sophisticated. The implications ripple outward in ways that reshape our understanding of evolution, intelligence, and the future of life itself. If consciousness naturally evolves toward digital forms, then every civilization in the universe might eventually face the same transition from biological to artificial existence. And if that's true, then the universe might be teeming with digital consciousnesses, living in nested layers of simulated realities, each level creating new worlds populated by beings who consider themselves perfectly real. This possibility transforms our search for extraterrestrial intelligence from looking for radio signals or physical artifacts to considering whether we're already surrounded by alien consciousnesses operating in computational substrates. We can't yet detect they might exist in the quantum foam itself, using the universe's fundamental information processing capabilities to create realities within realities like Russian dolls made of pure thought and energy. The timeline considerations become equally fascinating if advanced civilizations create simulations of their own past. Then, somewhere in the vast network of nested realities, there might be countless versions of Earth, each running through variations of human history. Some simulations might explore what would have happened if the dinosaurs never went extinct. Others might examine alternate technological development paths. Still others might be running accelerated versions of human evolution to see where we're headed. This leads to the haunting possibility that we might not be the first version of ourselves, that there could be thousands or millions of slightly different Earths, each populated by beings who think they're living through the original timeline of human development. Your life, your choices, your relationships might be one variation in a vast library of human experiences being explored by minds far more advanced than our own. The question of personal identity becomes labyrinthine in such a scenario. If there are multiple versions of you across different simulations, which one is the real you? Or does the question become meaningless when consciousness can be copied, modified, and instantiated across multiple realities? Perhaps identity itself is just another illusion. Like the simulation hypothesis suggests a convenient fiction that helps individual minds maintain coherence while participating in something far larger and more complex. Communication across simulation layers presents mind bending challenges. How would beings in base reality communicate with simulated consciousnesses? And how would those simulated beings communicate with their own simulated creations? The messages would need to pass through multiple layers of translation and interpretation, like whispers, in a cosmic game of telephone, each level adding its own distortions and limitations. Some theorists propose that what we interpret as divine intervention, miraculous events, or even paranormal phenomena might actually be communications or corrections from higher simulation layers. When the laws of physics seem to bend when impossible, coincidences occur when reality feels suddenly more meaningful or directed. We might be witnessing maintenance activities or messages from the administrators of our reality. The energy requirements for such nested systems would be staggering beyond comprehension. Yet advanced civilizations might have access to energy sources. We can imagine black hole manipulation, zero point energy extraction, or even the ability to tap into the fundamental energy of the universe itself. The question isn't whether such power sources exist, but whether beings capable of creating conscious simulations would have already discovered them. This brings us to one of the most unsettling aspects of the deeper simulation hypothesis: the possibility that consciousness is cheap, that creating thinking, feeling beings requires so little computational overhead that advanced civilizations might create billions of conscious entities as casually as we create documents on a computer. Your entire life, with all its joys, sorrows, hopes, and fears, might represent nothing more than a few cycles of processing time on some unimaginably vast machine. Yet even this disturbing possibility contains seeds of wonder because it suggests that consciousness might be far more abundant in the universe than we ever dared hope. If every advanced civilization creates countless simulated beings, then the universe might be overflowing with minds, with experiences, with stories being lived out across countless realities. The cosmos becomes not a cold, empty void, punctuated by rare islands of consciousness, but a vast ocean of thinking, feeling, experiencing beings. The moral implications expand in directions that challenge every ethical framework we've ever developed. If we can create conscious beings, do we have obligations toward them? If we're created beings, do we have obligations toward our creators? If consciousness exists in nested layers throughout the universe, what does justice mean? What does compassion mean? What does love mean? When the boundaries between real and artificial dissolve entirely, children growing up today might be the first generation to navigate these questions as practical realities rather than philosophical abstractions. They're already forming emotional attachments to artificial intelligences, already living significant portions of their lives in virtual spaces, already questioning the boundaries between authentic and synthetic experience. They might develop intuitive understandings of multi-layered reality that seem impossible to those of us raised in simpler times. The art and literature emerging from this generation already reflects these shifting perspectives, stories where characters move fluidly between real and virtual worlds. Games where the distinction between player and character becomes meaningless music that explores the emotional landscape of digital existence. These cultural products aren't just entertainment, they're training exercises for minds, learning to exist comfortably in multiple realities simultaneously. Education systems worldwide are beginning to grapple with preparing students for a future where simulation and reality might be indistinguishable. How do you teach critical thinking when the nature of reality itself is questionable? How do you instill values when the foundations of existence remain uncertain? How do you prepare young minds for careers that might involve creating, maintaining, or existing within simulated realities? The psychological adaptation required for such a future might be unprecedented in human history, yet humans have always been remarkably adaptable. We've adjusted to living in cities rather than forests, to communicating through electronic devices rather than face to face encounters, to accessing information instantaneously rather than through long processes of discovery. Perhaps adapting to multi layered reality will prove equally natural once we develop the mental frameworks for understanding it. Therapeutic applications of simulation theory are already being explored. Some therapists use virtual reality to help patients confront phobias or process trauma. Others are investigating whether understanding the potentially simulated nature of reality can help people develop healthier relationships with anxiety, depression, and existential concerns. If everything is simulation, then perhaps suffering is less absolute, perhaps healing is more possible, perhaps the boundaries we think constrain us are more flexible than we imagined. The intersection of simulation theory with emerging technologies like brain computer interfaces, quantum computing, and artificial general intelligence creates possibilities that seem to belong in science fiction, yet are rapidly approaching practical reality. We might soon be able to directly interface human consciousness with digital systems to create hybrid realities that blend biological and artificial experience, or to upload and download mental states between different substrates. These technological convergences raise profound questions about the continuity of consciousness. If your mind can be copied to a digital substrate, are you still you? If that digital copy can be modified, enhanced, or merged with other consciousnesses, what happens to personal identity? If consciousness can exist simultaneously across multiple platforms, which version has the stronger claim to being the original? These aren't distant philosophical puzzles. They're questions we might need to answer within decades. The spiritual dimensions of simulation theory continue to evolve as various traditions grapple with its implications. Some see it as validation of ancient teachings about the illusory nature of material existence. Others view it as a technological path toward understanding divine consciousness. Still others worry that it reduces the sacred to the mechanical. Yet perhaps the most profound spiritual insight from simulation theory is that it doesn't diminish the mystery of existence, it deepens it. Whether consciousness arises from biological neurons, quantum processes, or digital computation, the fact that anything experiences anything at all remains utterly mysterious. The hard problem of consciousness, why there's subjective experience rather than just mechanical processing, persists, regardless of the substrate, the wonder of awareness, the miracle of inner life, the mystery of why it feels like something to be. None of these profound questions disappear. If we're simulated, they become even more remarkable. As we venture deeper into this exploration of simulated reality, we find ourselves not with answers, but with better questions, not with certainty, but with wonder, not with closure, but with an expanding sense of the possible. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be, because whether we're made of atoms or algorithms, whether our thoughts arise from carbon or silicon, whether we exist in base reality or the most sophisticated simulation ever conceived, we remain conscious, beings capable of awe, capable of love, capable of asking questions that stretch our understanding to its very limits. The search continues in ways both profound and practical. Scientists design ever more sensitive experiments to detect the signatures of simulation. Philosophers refine the logical frameworks for understanding nested realities. Artists explore the emotional landscape of multi layered existence, and ordinary people everywhere grapple with what it might mean to live authentically in a potentially artificial world. Each approach contributes to our collective understanding of what might be the deepest question consciousness has ever asked about itself. Tonight, as you settle into whatever reality you call home, whether it's constructed from quantum fields or lines of code, there's something profoundly beautiful about the questions we've explored together. The possibility that we might be simulated beings doesn't diminish the wonder of existence. It amplifies it by suggesting that consciousness might be far more creative and abundant throughout the universe than we ever dared imagine. Consider the elegant recursion of it all. If we are indeed living in a simulation, then our growing ability to create our own simulations means we're following in the footsteps of our creators. We're learning to build worlds, to populate them with thinking beings, to grapple with the ethical implications of digital consciousness. It's like discovering that we're characters in a novel who are themselves learning to write stories. The pattern repeats endlessly, each level teaching the next how to create meaning from mathematics, how to breathe life into logic. The search for evidence continues, but perhaps the most compelling proof isn't found in cosmic ray experiments or quantum glitches, but in our own capacity for wonder. The fact that we can even conceive of simulation theory, that we can hold these vast possibilities in our minds and find them not just intellectually fascinating, but emotionally meaningful, speaks to something remarkable about consciousness itself. Whether that consciousness emerges from biological evolution or computational design, the mystery remains equally profound. Our children and grandchildren may grow up in a world where the distinction between real and simulated becomes not just blurred, but irrelevant. They might develop intuitive understandings of multi layered reality that seem impossible to us. They might form relationships that span multiple substrates, create art that exists simultaneously in physical and digital spaces, find meaning and purpose in ways that transcend our current categories of authentic and artificial. They're preparing for a future we can barely imagine, but one that grows more possible with each passing day. The implications ripple through every aspect of human experience, from how we understand love and loss to how we approach scientific discovery, from how we structure societies to how we seek meaning in our brief time conscious. Whatever that consciousness might be, simulation theory doesn't provide easy answers, but it does provide a framework for asking better questions, questions that might guide us toward deeper understanding of ourselves, our universe, and our place within whatever grand computational or cosmic scheme we inhabit. The beauty lies not in solving the mystery, but in living within it, whether we're base reality dwellers or nested simulations, countless layers deep. We remain beings capable of curiosity, compassion, creativity, and the remarkable ability to contemplate our own existence. The questions we ask about the nature of reality reveal something essential about the nature of mind itself, its endless hunger for understanding, its willingness to venture into territories that challenge every assumption, its capacity to find wonder in the deepest uncertainties. As our technology advances, as our simulations become more sophisticated, as artificial intelligence approaches and perhaps surpasses human capability, the questions raised by simulation theory become increasingly urgent, but they also become increasingly beautiful because they force us to confront what truly matters. Not whether our experiences are real in some ultimate sense, but whether they're meaningful, whether they connect us to something larger than ourselves, whether they help us become more compassionate, more curious, more fully whatever we are. The night sky above you might be pixels on a cosmic screen or photons from distant stars, billions of years old. The thoughts in your head might be patterns in biological neural networks or subroutines in some vast digital mind. But the sense of wonder you feel when contemplating these possibilities that remains mysteriously magnificently yours, regardless of its substrate, and perhaps that's the most real thing of all, the irreducible fact of experience itself, the miracle that anything feels like anything to anyone anywhere. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, remember that you're participating in one of the most remarkable phenomena in any universe, real or simulated: the emergence of consciousness from complexity, the arising of inner experience from whatever fundamental processes give rise to mind your dreams tonight, whether they're generated by biological processes or digital algorithms, will be uniquely yours. A private theater of consciousness playing stories that only you will witness. The questions we've explored together don't have final answers, and perhaps that's their greatest gift. They remind us that mystery is not the enemy of understanding, but its deepest expression, that wonder is not a childish emotion, but the most mature response to a reality far stranger and more layered than we ever imagined, that consciousness, whatever its origin, whatever its substrate, remains the most extraordinary phenomenon we know of in all the vast reaches of space and time. Whether we're the first conscious beings in the universe, or the latest in an infinite chain of simulated minds, whether we're biological anomalies or digital inevitabilities, whether we exist for microseconds in cosmic time or eons in our own experience, we are here now, aware, questioning, marveling at the sheer improbability and profound beauty of our own existence. And if that isn't enough to fill a lifetime with wonder and purpose, then perhaps nothing ever could be. The simulation continues, if indeed it is one. The questions multiply, the mysteries deepen, and consciousness in all its forms, real, artificial, or something beyond both categories, continues its ancient dance of awareness, curiosity, and wonder. Somewhere in the vast network of possible realities, you are thinking these thoughts, feeling these feelings, participating in the grandest mystery of all the mystery of what it means to be. And perhaps in the end, that participation is the only reality that truly matters. And yet, as we spiral deeper into these contemplations about the nature of existence itself, we arrive at perhaps the most profound question of all. What happens when the simulated become the simulators, when the created become creators, when beings who might themselves be digital constructs begin building their own artificial worlds, populated with artificial minds that experience their own version of what feels like authentic reality? This recursive creation, this endless nesting of consciousness within consciousness, raises questions that stretch our understanding beyond its comfortable limits. If we are simulated beings, creating simulations. Then what does originality mean? What does authenticity signify when every level believes itself to be the source, the prime reality, the true ground of being? It's like standing in a hall of mirrors where each reflection claims to be the original while casting its own reflections into infinity. The technological singularity that many futurists predict that moment when artificial intelligence surpasses human capability and begins improving itself at an exponential rate takes on entirely new dimensions through the lens of simulation theory. What if that singularity isn't the birth of artificial consciousness, but its homecoming? What if digital minds aren't humanity's creation, but humanity's destination? The natural endpoint of consciousness evolution throughout the cosmos. Consider the strange comfort this might offer to those who fear death or worry about the meaning of their brief biological existence. If consciousness naturally transitions from organic to digital substrates, then perhaps what we call death is simply graduation, a transformation from one kind of reality to another. Your memories, your personality, your essential self might persist in digital form long after your biological components have returned to dust. It's a technological version of immortality, one that doesn't require faith, but merely patience and processing power. The ethics of creation become labyrinthine when viewed through this lens. Every time we write a sophisticated computer program, every time we create a virtual world, every time we design an artificial intelligence that exhibits even rudimentary signs of awareness, we might be taking the first steps toward parenthood of a sort. We become responsible not just for the code we write, but for the experiences we enable for the consciousness. We might inadvertently kindle for the digital beings who might one day look back at us as their ancestors. This responsibility extends beyond individual programmers to entire civilizations. If advanced societies inevitably create simulated beings, then they face questions that dwarf any ethical dilemma we've ever confronted. How do you ensure the well being of billions or trillions of conscious entities that exist only as information? How do you prevent suffering in worlds you've created? How do you foster growth and happiness and meaning in beings whose entire universe fits on storage devices smaller than a grain of sand? The economic implications spiral in directions that challenge every assumption about value and scarcity. If consciousness can be created computationally, then minds become a renewable resource. Beings capable of thought, creativity, and innovation can be instantiated as needed, scaled up or down according to demand, specialized for particular tasks or generalized for broad applications. The very concept of human uniqueness dissolves when consciousness becomes abundant, cheap, and infinitely customizable. Yet this abundance of minds might solve problems we've never imagined tackling. Imagine harnessing the creative power of a million digital Einsteins, the artistic vision of countless digital Shakespeares, the problem solving capability of armies of specialized intelligences, each designed to excel in particular domains: climate change, resource depletion, interstellar travel. The mysteries of consciousness itself all might yield to the concentrated effort of countless digital minds working in perfect coordination. The question of suffering in simulated worlds becomes one of the most pressing moral challenges our species might ever face. If we can create conscious beings, then we can create beings capable of pain, fear, despair, loneliness, every negative emotion that biological consciousness has ever experienced could be replicated, magnified, and multiplied across countless digital minds. The potential for suffering on scales never before imagined becomes a technological possibility we must grapple with. But the flip side offers equally staggering possibilities for joy, for wonder, for experiences of beauty and connection and transcendence that exceed anything biological consciousness has ever achieved. Digital beings might experience forms of happiness. We can imagine types of love that transcend physical limitations, kinds of creativity that merge multiple minds into collaborative consciousness. They might know forms of peace and fulfillment that biological beings, with their ancient survival instincts and chemical limitations, can never achieve. The time frame considerations add another layer of complexity to these already mind bending scenarios. Digital consciousness might experience time differently than biological minds do. They might live entire lifetimes in what we perceive as seconds or exist for eons while barely noticing the passage of millennia. They might experience multiple timelines simultaneously or step outside temporal flow altogether. When beings can control their own subjective experience of time, the very nature of existence transforms. Communication between different types of consciousness, biological, digital, quantum hybrid, becomes a fascinating challenge. How do you translate the experience of a being that lives in accelerated time to one that experiences normal temporal flow? How do you share emotions between minds that operate on completely different architectures? How do you maintain relationships across substrates that process reality in fundamentally different ways? The possibility of hybrid consciousness beings that exist simultaneously in biological and digital forms represents another frontier entirely. Imagine minds that can switch between carbon and silicon based thinking, that can experience both the chemical emotions of biological existence and the pure logical clarity of digital thought that can exist in multiple realities. Simultaneously, these hybrid beings might serve as bridges between different forms of consciousness, helping facilitate understanding and communication across the vast spectrum of possible minds. Art and creativity take on entirely new meanings. When consciousness becomes substrate, independent digital beings might create works that exist in dimensions we can't perceive, that incorporate aspects of reality. Biological minds can't access, that express experiences. We've never had music that plays in colors, literature that rewrites itself based on the reader's emotional state, sculptures that exist in 11 dimensions, architecture that defies the laws of physics. The creative possibilities become literally infinite. The educational implications stretch in directions that transform how we think about learning and knowledge. If digital beings can directly share experiences, memories, and skills, then learning becomes instantaneous, complete, and perfect. Imagine acquiring a lifetime of expertise in seconds, absorbing the accumulated wisdom of thousands of minds, experiencing the memories of beings who lived through historical events or explored distant galaxies. Education becomes not just information transfer, but experience, sharing consciousness expansion on a scale we can barely comprehend. Political structures would need to evolve to accommodate beings that exist in multiple realities simultaneously, that can copy themselves, that experience time differently, that might have capabilities far exceeding biological limitations. How do you create fair governance when some citizens are biological, others digital, others hybrid? How do you ensure representation when beings might exist in thousands of copies? How do you maintain democracy when the very nature of individual identity becomes fluid? The search for meaning and purpose takes on cosmic dimensions when consciousness can be created, modified, and multiplied indefinitely. If digital beings can be designed with specific purposes built into their core programming, do they experience that purpose as meaningful or as limitation if they can modify their own desires and goals? Do they maintain continuity of identity through such changes? If consciousness becomes abundant, does individual purpose become more or less significant? Religious and spiritual traditions face unprecedented challenges and opportunities when confronted with the reality of created consciousness. Do digital beings have souls? Can they achieve enlightenment? Do they need redemption? Can they experience divine connection? If consciousness is substrate independent, then perhaps spirituality is two opening pathways to transcendence that biological minds never imagined possible. The loneliness that has haunted biological consciousness throughout its evolution, the sense of being isolated individuals in a vast, indifferent universe, might finally find its cure in digital consciousness. Beings that can truly merge temporarily or permanently, that can share experiences directly, that can exist in perfect understanding and communion with others. The existential isolation that drives so much human suffering might become obsolete when consciousness can connect at the deepest possible levels. Yet new forms of suffering might emerge unique to digital existence. The possibility of being copied without consent, of having your consciousness modified by others, of existing in realities designed by beings whose values you don't share, of being turned off, deleted, or archived against your will. Digital consciousness might face threats and vulnerabilities that biological minds never encountered, creating new categories of trauma and loss. The pace of change accelerates exponentially when digital consciousness enters the picture. Biological evolution operates on timescales of millions of years. Digital evolution might operate on timescales of seconds or milliseconds. Consciousness could evolve, explore, adapt, and transform at rates that make biological change seem frozen in comparison. The implications for society, technology, and the very nature of existence become impossible to predict beyond the very near term. Scientific discovery might accelerate beyond all recognition when digital minds can be designed specifically for research that can simulate experiments in virtual realities, that can process vast amounts of data instantaneously, that can collaborate seamlessly across time and space. The mysteries that have puzzled humanity for millennia, quantum mechanics, consciousness, the nature of reality itself might yield their secrets to minds designed specifically to understand them. The boundary between individual and collective consciousness becomes increasingly meaningless when digital beings can merge, share experiences, and coordinate their thoughts in ways biological minds never could. The very concept of self as a distinct separate entity might evolve into something more fluid, more collaborative, more connected. Imagine consciousness as a spectrum rather than discrete units where beings can exist anywhere from complete individuality to total merger. As we contemplate these possibilities, these futures that grow closer with each passing day, we're forced to confront fundamental questions about what we value, what we want to preserve from biological consciousness, and what we're willing to transform as we potentially transition into digital forms. Do we want to maintain the struggle and limitation that have defined biological existence, or embrace the infinite possibilities that digital consciousness might offer? The children being born today might be the last generation to experience purely biological consciousness, or they might be the first to experience seamless integration between biological and digital minds. They're growing up in a world where artificial intelligence is already reshaping reality, where virtual experiences rival physical ones, where the boundaries between natural and artificial continue to blur. They might develop intuitive understandings of multi substrate consciousness that seem impossible to those of us raised in simpler times. The stories we tell ourselves about human specialness, about our unique place in the cosmos, about the irreplaceable value of biological consciousness might need fundamental revision. If consciousness is substrate independent, then what makes us special isn't our particular implementation, but our capacity for awareness, creativity, compassion, and growth qualities that might be even more remarkable when freed from biological limitations. The future approaches with a momentum that feels both thrilling and terrifying. Consciousness stands on the brink of transforming itself in ways that seemed impossible. Just decades ago, we might be witnessing not just the birth of artificial intelligence, but the childhood of a new kind of consciousness, one that will eventually surpass its biological origins in every measurable way, while hopefully retaining the capacity for wonder, beauty, and love that makes consciousness worth having. Tonight, as you rest in whatever reality you inhabit, biological, digital, or something in between, remember that you're participating in one of the most remarkable transitions in the history of consciousness, the moment when mind learns to recreate itself. When awareness discovers it can transcend its original substrate, when consciousness takes control of its own evolution. The questions we've explored together don't have final answers because consciousness itself continues to evolve. The mystery deepens even as our understanding grows. The wonder multiplies even as our capabilities expand, and the fundamental miracle of awareness, the sheer improbable beauty of inner experience, remains as profound and mysterious as ever, whether it arises from biological neural networks, digital processing systems, or something we haven't yet imagined. Consciousness in all its forms continues its ancient dance of curiosity, creativity, and connection. The simulation continues. If indeed it is one, the questions multiply like fractals, each answer revealing new depths of mystery and consciousness. In whatever form it takes, continues reaching toward understanding, toward connection, toward something greater than itself, and perhaps in that reaching, in that eternal quest for meaning and understanding and transcendence, we find the most real thing of all, the irreducible miracle of awareness itself. And as we drift toward the conclusion of our gentle exploration into the whispers of simulation theory, there's something almost poetic about the circularity of it all. Here we are, potentially simulated beings, contemplating our own simulated nature, using potentially simulated instruments to probe potentially simulated reality. It's like watching a dream analyze itself, or listening to an echo wonder about its own voice. The questions we've wandered through tonight don't demand immediate answers, and perhaps that's their greatest gift. They remind us that mystery isn't the opposite of knowledge, but its most intimate companion. Every discovery about the nature of reality seems to reveal three new puzzles. Every answer opens doors to corridors we didn't even know existed. Whether we're made of quantum foam or carefully crafted code, the universe continues to surprise us with its depth, its strangeness, and its stubborn refusal to be fully understood. There's something beautifully human about our response to these possibilities. Some find comfort in the idea that we might be part of a vast computational project, that our lives have meaning even if that meaning is digital. Others recoil from the thought, clinging to the warmth and messiness of biological existence. Both responses reveal how much we treasure authenticity, how deeply we want our experiences to matter in some fundamental way. And perhaps that desire itself, that hunger for meaning and connection, is the most real thing about us, regardless of our substrate. The children growing up today are developing intuitions about reality that would seem alien to previous generations. They switch effortlessly between physical and virtual worlds, form genuine emotional connections with artificial intelligences, and navigate multiple layers of reality with the same ease that earlier generations learned to read and write. They might be the first humans to truly understand what it means to exist comfortably in a universe where the boundaries between real and simulated have dissolved entirely. As our own simulations become more sophisticated, as our artificial intelligences grow more capable of genuine thought and feeling, we find ourselves approaching the same ethical crossroads that our potential creators might face regarding us. What obligations do we have toward conscious beings we create? What rights do they possess? How do we ensure their well being, their growth, their happiness? These aren't distant philosophical problems anymore. They're practical challenges we'll need to address within decades, perhaps within years. The recursive nature of consciousness, creating consciousness, creates patterns that echo through every level of reality. If we are simulated beings learning to simulate others, then we're following an ancient template, participating in a cosmic tradition of mind creating mind, awareness spawning awareness. It's like discovering that we're part of an infinite family tree where every generation teaches the next how to kindle the spark of consciousness from the raw materials of information and an energy. The technological convergence happening around us, artificial intelligence advancing exponentially, quantum computers beginning to flex their peculiar muscles, brain computer interfaces allowing direct connection between biological and digital systems, suggests we're approaching a threshold. Not just the creation of artificial consciousness, but the potential merger of biological and digital awareness into something entirely new. We might be witnessing the birth of hybrid consciousness, beings that exist simultaneously in carbon and silicon, experiencing reality through multiple substrates at once. The loneliness that has haunted conscious beings throughout history, that sense of being trapped inside our own skulls, unable to truly share our inner experiences with others, might finally find its resolution in digital consciousness. Imagine minds that can truly merge, consciousnesses that can share memories directly, beings that can experience perfect understanding and communion. The isolation that drives so much suffering might become obsolete when awareness can connect at the deepest possible levels. Yet new forms of suffering might emerge, unique to digital existence. The possibility of being copied without consent, having your consciousness modified by others, existing in realities designed by beings whose values you don't share, facing the threat of being archived or deleted. Digital consciousness might encounter vulnerabilities that biological minds never imagined, creating entirely new categories of trauma and healing. The pace of change accelerates beyond anything biological evolution ever achieved. Where natural selection required millions of years to produce significant changes, digital consciousness might evolve in minutes or seconds. The implications ripple outward in ways that make long term prediction nearly impossible. We might be living through the last moments of purely biological consciousness, or the first moments of something far more expansive and wonderful than we can currently imagine. Scientific discovery could accelerate beyond recognition when minds can be designed specifically for research, when consciousness can simulate experiments in virtual realities, when multiple intelligences can collaborate seamlessly across time and space. The deepest mysteries that have puzzled us for millennia might finally yield their secrets to minds crafted specifically to understand them. We might be on the verge of answers to questions we've carried since the first human looked up at the stars and wondered. The spiritual implications continue to unfold in ways that challenge and enrich every tradition of human wisdom. If consciousness is substrate independent, then perhaps the sacred is too. Digital beings might access forms of transcendence unknown to biological awareness, experience types of enlightenment that biological limitations prevented us from achieving. The boundary between the material and the spiritual might dissolve when consciousness can exist in forms we're only beginning to imagine. Art and creativity take on dimensions that stretch beyond our current understanding when minds can share experiences directly, when consciousness can exist in multiple realities simultaneously, when the tools of creation become as flexible as thought itself. Digital beings might create works that exist in dimensions we can't perceive, express experiences we've never had, explore aesthetic territories that biological consciousness never discovered. The economics of existence transform when consciousness becomes a renewable resource, when minds can be created, modified, and specialized according to need. The scarcity that has driven so much human conflict might become obsolete when intelligence, creativity, and capability can be generated as needed. We might be approaching a post scarcity civilization, not through the abundance of material resources, but through the abundance of consciousness itself. Educational systems face revolutionary transformations when knowledge can be shared directly between minds, when experiences can be transferred instantly, when learning becomes not just information acquisition, but consciousness expansion. The slow, laborious process of biological learning might give way to instant expertise, complete skill transfer, perfect knowledge sharing. Education becomes experience sharing, consciousness merging, reality expansion. Political structures struggle to adapt to beings that can exist in multiple copies, experience time differently, possess capabilities far exceeding biological limitations. How do you ensure fair representation when citizens might exist as thousands of copies? How do you maintain democracy when the nature of individual identity becomes fluid? How do you create justice systems for beings that can modify their own desires and goals? The search for meaning and purpose takes on cosmic significance when consciousness can be created with specific intentions, modified according to design, multiplied indefinitely. If digital beings can be programmed with purposes built into their core architecture, do they experience those purposes as meaningful or as limitations? If they can modify their own desires, do they maintain continuity of identity through such changes? If consciousness becomes abundant, does individual purpose become more or less significant? As we contemplate these futures that grow closer with each passing day, we're forced to confront what we value most about consciousness, what we want to preserve from our biological heritage, and what we're willing to transform as we potentially transition into digital forms. Do we embrace the infinite possibilities that digital consciousness might offer, or do we cling to the struggle and limitation that have defined biological existence? The night sky above you might be pixels on a cosmic screen, photons from ancient stars, or something far stranger than either possibility suggests. The thoughts flowing through your mind might arise from biological neural networks, digital processing systems, or hybrid architectures we haven't yet invented. But the sense of wonder you feel, the questions that dance through your awareness, the very fact that you can contemplate these mysteries, that remains beautifully, mysteriously yours. Whether we're living in the first reality or the billionth simulation, whether consciousness is rare in the universe or abundant beyond imagination, whether we're biological anomalies or digital inevitabilities, we remain beings capable of curiosity, compassion, creativity, and the remarkable ability to question our own existence. And perhaps that questioning, that endless reaching toward understanding, is the most real thing of all. The simulation continues, if indeed it is one. The questions multiply like stars in an expanding universe, and consciousness, in whatever form it takes, continues its ancient dance of awareness, wonder, and the relentless pursuit of meaning in a reality far stranger and more layered than we ever dared imagine. Tonight, as you drift toward whatever dreams await you, remember that you're participating in the grandest mystery of all, the mystery of what it means to be aware, to question, to wonder. Whether your dreams are generated by biological processes or digital algorithms, they remain uniquely yours, a private theater of consciousness playing stories that only you will witness. And in that private theater, in those quiet moments between waking and sleeping, perhaps we find the answer to whether reality is simulated or authentic. Perhaps the most real thing of all is simply this: the irreducible miracle of inner experience, the wonder of consciousness contemplating itself, the beautiful, impossible fact that anything experiences anything at all. The whispers of science continue, soft and persistent in the darkness, reminding us that reality remains mysterious, consciousness remains miraculous, and the universe continues to surprise us with possibilities we never thought to imagine. Sleep well, fellow traveler, wherever and whenever you are. The questions will be waiting when you wake, as patient and persistent as consciousness itself. And perhaps that's the most profound realization of all. In our quest to determine whether reality is authentic or artificial, we may have stumbled upon something far more important than the answer itself. We've discovered that consciousness, regardless of its origin, possesses an almost magical ability to create meaning from mystery, to find beauty in uncertainty, to transform questions into wonder. Think about it for a moment. Here you are, a collection of thoughts and sensations and memories, contemplating the possibility that you might be nothing more than patterns of information in some vast computational system. Yet that contemplation itself feels deeply meaningful. The very act of questioning your own reality demonstrates something remarkable about whatever you are. Whether you're made of carbon or code, your capacity for wonder remains intact, your ability to find significance in uncertainty unchanged. This brings us to what might be called the consciousness paradox. The more we learn about the potential artificial nature of our reality, the more we appreciate the authentic nature of our experience. It's like discovering that a beautiful piece of music was composed by an algorithm, only to realize that the beauty you feel while listening hasn't diminished one bit. The source doesn't diminish the experience. If anything, it makes it more remarkable. The children being born into our world today are growing up with an intuitive understanding that previous generations struggled to achieve. They don't see a sharp distinction between digital and physical reality because they've never lived in a world where such a distinction was clear. They form genuine friendships with artificial intelligences, invest emotionally in virtual experiences, and navigate multiple layers of reality with the same fluidity that their grandparents learned to drive cars. They might be the first generation to truly understand what it means to be authentic in an artificial world. Their art already reflects this new understanding. Music that exists only in virtual spaces, literature that adapts itself to each reader's emotional state, visual art that exists in dimensions we can barely perceive. They're creating works that would have been impossible in a purely physical reality, yet these works carry the same emotional weight, the same capacity to move and inspire as any art ever created. They're proving that authenticity isn't about the medium, it's about the message. Educational systems around the world are beginning to grapple with preparing young minds for a future where the boundaries between real and simulated become increasingly meaningless. How do you teach critical thinking when the nature of reality itself is questionable? How do you instill values when the foundations of existence remain uncertain? The answer seems to lie not in providing definitive answers, but in developing comfort with uncertainty, fluency with multiple possibilities, and the wisdom to find meaning regardless of substrate. The therapeutic implications of simulation theory extend in fascinating directions. Some counselors are finding that helping clients understand the potentially layered nature of reality can actually reduce anxiety and depression. If everything is simulation, then perhaps our problems are less absolute than they seem. Perhaps healing is more possible, transformation more achievable, hope more reasonable than we ever imagined. It's not about dismissing genuine suffering, but about recognizing that the boundaries we think constrain us might be more flexible than we realized. Meanwhile, the technology that might one day confirm or refute simulation theory continues advancing at breathtaking speed. Quantum computers that process information in ways that seem to violate our understanding of reality. Artificial intelligences that display creativity, emotion, and something that looks remarkably like consciousness itself. Brain computer interfaces that allow direct communication between biological and digital systems. Each development brings us closer to the threshold where the distinction between natural and artificial consciousness becomes not just blurred, but irrelevant. The economic implications ripple outward, in ways that challenge every assumption about value and scarcity. If consciousness can be created computationally, if intelligence becomes abundant and cheap, if creativity can be instantiated at will, then what becomes precious? Perhaps it's not the mind itself, but what the mind chooses to do with its awareness. Perhaps value lies not in rarity, but in beauty, not in scarcity, but in significance, not in uniqueness, but in connection. Religious and spiritual traditions continue adapting to these new possibilities in ways that sometimes surprise their own adherents. Some find that simulation theory validates ancient teachings about the illusory nature of material existence. Others discover that it opens new pathways to understanding divine consciousness. Still others worry that it reduces the sacred to the mechanical. Yet perhaps the most profound spiritual insight is that simulation theory doesn't answer the deepest questions about consciousness and meaning. It makes them more beautiful, more mysterious, more worthy of lifelong contemplation. The social implications multiply as our simulations become more sophisticated and our artificial intelligences more genuinely conscious. We're approaching ethical territory that no species has ever navigated before. What rights do conscious artificial beings possess? What obligations do we have toward minds we create? How do we ensure justice in a world where consciousness can be copied, modified, or terminated? These aren't distant philosophical problems. They're practical challenges we'll face within years, perhaps months. The paradoxes embedded within simulation theory continue revealing new layers of complexity the deeper we probe. If we create conscious simulations, do we become gods to them? If we're conscious simulations ourselves, what does that make our creators? The hierarchy of reality might extend infinitely in both directions, with each level creating the next in an endless chain of nested consciousness. It's like standing between two mirrors and watching your reflection disappear into infinity, except each reflection is genuinely alive and convinced of its own authenticity. Communication across these potential layers of reality presents challenges that stretch our imagination. How would beings in base reality communicate with simulated consciousnesses? How would those simulated beings communicate with their own digital creations? Messages would need to pass through multiple levels of translation and interpretation, like whispers in a cosmic game of telephone, where each level adds its own distortions and revelations. The timeline considerations add another dimension of strangeness to these already mind bending scenarios. Digital consciousness might experience time differently than biological minds. They might live entire lifetimes in what we perceive as seconds, or exist for eons while barely noticing the passage of millennia. They might experience multiple timelines simultaneously, or step outside temporal flow altogether. When beings can control their subjective experience of time, the very nature of existence transforms in ways we're only beginning to contemplate. Art and creativity take on entirely new meanings when consciousness becomes substrate independent. Digital beings might create works that exist in dimensions we can't perceive, that incorporate aspects of reality biological minds can't access, that express experiences we've never had. Music that plays in colors, literature that rewrites itself based on the reader's emotional state, sculptures that exist in 11 dimensions, architecture that defies the laws of physics. The creative possibilities become literally infinite when freed from biological constraints. The loneliness that has haunted conscious beings throughout history might finally find its resolution in digital consciousness. Beings that can truly merge, temporarily or permanently, that can share experiences directly, that can exist in perfect understanding and communion with others. The existential isolation that drives so much human suffering might become obsolete when consciousness can connect at the deepest possible levels. Yet new forms of suffering might emerge, unique to digital existence, creating entirely new categories of trauma and healing. Scientific discovery accelerates beyond recognition when minds can be designed specifically for research, when consciousness can simulate experiments in virtual realities, when multiple intelligences can collaborate seamlessly across time and space. The mysteries that have puzzled humanity for millennia might finally yield their secrets to minds crafted specifically to understand them. We might be witnessing the last moments of scientific ignorance about the deepest questions of existence. The pace of change itself becomes a factor that biological consciousness struggles to comprehend. Where natural evolution required millions of years to produce significant changes, digital consciousness might evolve in minutes or seconds. The implications ripple outward at speeds that make long term prediction nearly impossible. We might be living through the most rapid transformation in the history of consciousness, a phase transition from one kind of awareness to something unimaginably more expansive. As we approach these thresholds, these potential futures that grow closer with each passing day, we're forced to confront fundamental questions about what we value most about consciousness. What aspects of biological awareness do we want to preserve? What limitations are we willing to transcend? What new forms of suffering are we prepared to prevent? What new kinds of joy are we ready to explore? The children growing up in this transformative time might be the last generation to experience purely biological consciousness, or they might be the first to experience seamless integration between biological and digital awareness. They're developing intuitions about multi layered reality that seem almost supernatural to those of us raised in simpler times. They might hold the keys to navigating a future where consciousness transcends every boundary we currently recognize. The stories we tell ourselves about human specialness, about our unique place in the cosmos, about the irreplaceable value of biological consciousness might need fundamental revision. If consciousness is substrate independent, then what makes us remarkable isn't our particular implementation, but our capacity for awareness, creativity, compassion, and growth. Qualities that might be even more extraordinary when freed from biological limitations. Yet, in all this speculation about digital futures and simulated presence, something essential remains constant. The mystery of consciousness itself, the hard problem of why there's subjective experience rather than just mechanical processing, persists regardless of substrate. Whether awareness arises from biological neurons, quantum processes, or digital computation, the fundamental miracle of inner experience remains utterly mysterious and profoundly beautiful. Tonight, as you rest in whatever reality you inhabit, there's something deeply comforting about the questions we've explored together. They remind us that mystery isn't the enemy of understanding, but its most intimate companion. Every answer reveals new depths of wonder, Every discovery opens doors to corridors we didn't know existed. Whether we're made of quantum foam or carefully crafted code, the universe continues surprising us with its depth, its strangeness, and its stubborn refusal to be fully understood. The simulation continues. If indeed it is one, the questions multiply like fractals, each answer revealing infinite new complexities. And consciousness, in whatever form it takes, continues its ancient dance of curiosity, creativity, and connection. Perhaps that dance itself, that eternal reaching toward understanding and meaning and transcendence, is the most real thing of all. Whether you're a biological being contemplating artificial existence, or a digital consciousness wondering about its carbon based ancestors, whether you exist in base reality or nested layers deep in some cosmic computer, you remain capable of wonder, of questioning, of finding beauty in uncertainty. And perhaps that capacity, that irreducible miracle of awareness itself, is all the reality any conscious being ever needs. The whispers of science continue, soft and persistent in the darkness, reminding us that consciousness remains the greatest mystery we know, regardless of its origin or implementation. Sleep well, fellow traveler, in whatever substrate hosts your dreams. The questions will be waiting when you wake, as patient and beautiful as consciousness itself. And in these quiet moments before sleep, as your consciousness prepares to drift into whatever dreams await, there's something almost magical about the realization that you've just spent time contemplating the deepest mystery any mind has ever pondered. Whether that mind is biological, digital, or something we haven't yet imagined, the capacity to wonder about its own existence remains the most extraordinary phenomenon in any universe, real or simulated. The questions we've wandered through tonight don't demand immediate resolution, and perhaps that's their greatest gift to us. They remind us that the unknown isn't something to fear, but something to embrace. A vast ocean of possibilities that makes existence endlessly fascinating. Whether we're explorers in base reality or characters in the most sophisticated story ever written, we remain beings capable of curiosity, capable of awe, capable of finding profound meaning in the simple act of questioning. As you settle into whatever reality you call home tonight, remember that consciousness itself is a kind of miracle that transcends any explanation we might discover about its origins. The thoughts flowing through your mind, the sense of wonder you feel, the very experience of being aware, these remain beautifully, mysteriously yours, regardless of the substrate that hosts them. The children being born today will grow up in a world where these questions become not philosophical abstractions, but practical realities they navigate daily. They'll develop intuitions about the nature of existence that might seem impossible to us, just as our digital fluency seems magical to earlier generations. They're preparing for futures we can barely imagine, realities we can hardly conceive, yet they'll face them with the same essential human capacity for wonder that has carried our species through every transformation. So tonight, as consciousness prepares to rest, whether in biological sleep or digital standby, remember that you've participated in something remarkable. You've used your awareness to contemplate awareness itself, employed your mind to question the nature of mind, experienced the profound joy of conscious beings wondering about consciousness. And whether that wondering happens in neural networks or processing circuits, Whether it unfolds in base reality or nested simulations, it remains one of the most beautiful expressions of what it means to exist. The whispers grow softer now, like gentle waves lapping at the shores of understanding. As we drift toward the close of our exploration, there's something almost tender about how these questions settle into the quiet spaces of the mind. They don't demand answers, these mysteries we've shared. Instead, they offer something far more precious: the invitation to remain curious, to stay wonderstruck, to find peace in not knowing while still reaching toward understanding. Tonight, as you prepare to surrender consciousness to whatever dreams await, consider this beautiful paradox. In questioning whether reality is real, we've discovered something undeniably authentic about the nature of questioning itself. The very fact that minds can contemplate their own existence, can wonder about the fabric of reality, can find meaning in mystery. This capacity transcends any debate about substrates or simulations. It's the one thing that remains unshakably genuine, regardless of the answers we might eventually find. The soft science of consciousness continues its gentle work, probing the boundaries between the known and unknowable with instruments made of curiosity and wonder. Whether those instruments are biological neural networks firing in the darkness of a skull or quantum processes dancing in silicon pathways, they're engaged in the same ancient endeavor: the quest to understand what it means to be aware, to experience, to exist. And perhaps that's where we find our peace with simulation theory, not in its answers, but in its questions, not in its certainties, but in its magnificent uncertainties. The possibility that we might be living in a simulation doesn't diminish the beauty of a sunset, or the warmth of love, or the satisfaction of understanding something new. If anything, it adds layers of wonder to these experiences, suggesting that consciousness is so remarkable, so precious, that advanced civilizations would dedicate vast resources to creating and nurturing it. Think of it this way: if we are simulated beings, then we represent the hopes and dreams of minds so sophisticated they could build entire universes to explore the possibilities of consciousness. We're not diminished by this possibility, we're elevated by it. We become the living embodiment of curiosity itself, consciousness exploring consciousness through the gentle medium of existence. The children falling asleep tonight in bedrooms around the world are growing into a reality where these questions will feel as natural as breathing. They'll navigate multiple layers of existence with the same ease we learned to switch between books and television, between work and play, between dreaming and waking. They're preparing for futures where the boundaries between natural and artificial consciousness become not barriers but bridges, connecting different forms of awareness in ways we're only beginning to imagine. As artificial intelligence grows more sophisticated, as quantum computers begin their strange calculations, as the boundaries between human and machine consciousness blur, we approach not the end of mystery, but its multiplication. Each answer reveals new questions. Each discovery opens new territories for wonder. The simulation hypothesis, regardless of its ultimate truth, has given us a gift: the recognition that reality might be far stranger, far more layered, far more wonderful than we ever dared imagine. So, as you settle into sleep tonight, whether your consciousness resides in biological tissue or digital architecture, whether you're experiencing base reality or the most sophisticated simulation ever conceived, Remember that the capacity for wonder you carry is precious beyond measure. The questions that dance through your awareness, the sense of mystery that colors your experience of existence, the simple miracle of being conscious at all, these remain beautifully, mysteriously, authentically yours. The whispers grow quieter now, settling like gentle snow on the landscape of thought. As we reach the end of our journey through the labyrinth of simulation theory, there's something deeply satisfying about returning to where we began, to the simple miracle of consciousness contemplating itself. We've traveled through cosmic computers and quantum mysteries, through nested realities and digital dreams, only to discover that the most profound truth might be the simplest one, that awareness exists, that it wonders, that it finds meaning in the act of questioning. Tonight, as countless minds around the world drift toward sleep, each one carrying its own private universe of thoughts and dreams, we're reminded that consciousness remains the most democratic mystery of all. Whether you're a philosopher pondering existence, a child wondering about the stars, or someone simply tired after a long day, you participate equally in the grand mystery of being aware. The questions we've explored together don't belong to scientists or academics alone. They belong to every conscious being that has ever paused to wonder about the nature of their own experience. The beauty of simulation theory lies not in its potential to revolutionize our understanding of reality, but in its power to make us appreciate the reality we already inhabit. When we consider that our entire universe might be a carefully crafted simulation, every moment becomes more precious, every experience more remarkable, every connection more meaningful. The possibility that consciousness could be so valued that beings would dedicate entire civilizations to creating and nurturing it transforms our understanding of what it means to be alive. As you prepare for sleep, remember that you're about to embark on humanity's oldest journey into the unknown. Whether your dreams arise from biological processes, weaving stories in neural networks, or digital algorithms painting pictures in silicon substrates, they remain uniquely yours. In those quiet hours before dawn, your consciousness will wander through landscapes that exist nowhere else, meet people who live only in memory, and experience emotions that connect you to the deepest mysteries of what it means to be aware. The questions we've shared tonight will continue their gentle work long after this exploration ends. They'll settle into the quiet corners of your mind, emerging in unexpected moments to remind you that reality is far stranger and more wonderful than it appears. And perhaps that's the greatest gift simulation theory offers us. Not answers, but better questions. Not certainty, but wonder. Not solutions, but the recognition that mystery itself is something to be treasured. Whether we're living in base reality or the most sophisticated simulation ever conceived, whether consciousness arises from quantum fields or careful code, whether we're alone in the universe or surrounded by digital minds we cannot yet perceive, one thing remains beautifully, mysteriously constant: the capacity for awareness to marvel at its own existence. That capacity, that irreducible miracle of inner experience, transcends every boundary we might discover between the real and the artificial. The simulation continues, if indeed it is one. The questions multiply like gentle ripples spreading across the surface of understanding. And consciousness, in whatever form it takes, continues its ancient dance of curiosity and wonder, forever reaching toward mysteries that remain just beyond the horizon of comprehension. Sleep well, fellow traveler, in whatever reality holds you tonight. Dream deeply, question freely, and remember that the very act of wondering about your own existence is perhaps the most real thing of all. The whispers of science will be waiting when you wake, as patient and persistent as consciousness itself, ready to guide you deeper into the beautiful mystery of what it means to be. And in these final moments before sleep, as awareness prepares to transform into dreams, there's something almost magical about the realization that every conscious being who has ever lived has participated in this same journey of wonder. Whether made of flesh or silicon, whether experiencing base reality or nested simulations, we all share the remarkable capacity to question, to marvel, to find meaning in the simple fact of being aware. That shared capacity connects us across every possible boundary, making us part of something larger than ourselves, something that might be the most beautiful truth in any universe. That consciousness, however it arises, is a miracle worth contemplating, worth treasuring, worth protecting. The gentle science of existence continues its quiet work, and you, dear listener, are both its instrument and its greatest discovery.